I've got my oldest child, who's a primary care physician, who's a graduate from your medical program, and he's incredibly prepared and very happy. So I'm happy to support the university. So I'd first like to welcome everyone. Obviously, we're among some new times, so sensitive to your time. I want to make it fruitful for you. I'm going to see if I can get this my next slide to go. There we go. So I want to give you a little bit of background on who I am, because obviously if you're going to have someone give a workshop, you want to make sure they're qualified. I've got a degree in computer engineering from UF. I was in engineering for a total of 5 years. And I'm giving you kind of a little bit of my background in terms of the way it's split up between my years in engineering, which is what I studied, to what I did after engineering, because regardless of what you study, regardless of what you master in, if you decide to get an accelerated degree after your bachelor's, you never know where the future will take you. So if you look at my experience, I've started in engineering, but didn't necessarily end up there. In fact, 27 of the years, the last 27 years, I spent 12 years as an employee, and more than 12 years as a business owner. I've owned 2 businesses. So in terms of being able to provide a workshop on interviewing, let me see if I can master this here a second. I've done about 280 interviews throughout my career. I've managed a total of about 115 people in my career. I've volunteered over 10,000 hours. That's a huge number to share, because in order for you to not only get opportunities to get employed, but move up in the world, I'm a strong believer that giving back is as important as you taking in. And then I'll touch a little bit on what these touch points are, but I do about 150 LinkedIn touch points with people that I'm connected to, and I won't deviate from that for a second. And I do about a book a month, and most of the books that I read are very, pertinent to the business that I'm in, as opposed to some level of nonfiction. So if there are any questions, I'll continue. Nope. And then the span of my 32 years, I went from engineer to sales engineer, tech sales manager, business owner, and currently business leader. In terms of an interview, it's important that we all agree on what the definition is. There are a multitude of different definitions. I've kind of simplified the definition as such. If there's anyone that kind of sort of disagrees with the definition, I certainly would respect your opinion, but at the end of the day, it's just an exchange of information based on questions and answers to validate that you're good for the company. And quite the thing that never gets ever discussed is it's your opportunity to validate whether the employer is good for your career objectives. There's always that pressure that, oh my God, I have an interview and I've got to do well. Well, I come from a different school of thought. I think the employers have to do well as well. Because it's in your career path, your chosen career path to get a degree, you should have the right to decide where you work as well. So that is the basis of which I'm going to provide some tips. So in terms of where do I start? One of the things that I've learned here at Amazon is that you start with, the end of mind. So think of yourself not only trying to get a job, but trying to establish yourself in a career path. Think about where you want to end up. Have an idea of what is the ideal job description that fits your career experience and expertise. And I want to use the word realistic job postings, because optimism can sometimes blind people. And, you can't tell, but I'm about 5'6". I'm not really that tall. So if I went out and I was looking out for a job and I wanted to go play for the Miami Heat, even if I was essentially a pretty good basketball player, there are not a whole lot of basketball players that are 5'6". Now that doesn't sound like I'm talking someone out of pursuing career goals. I'm just saying be realistic, right? If you're going to go for a job, make sure that you're 80%, 85%, ideally 90% qualified to apply. Because what happens is if you apply for these unrealistic positions, then they turn you down, or you don't get a call back, and then just kind of sort of just beats you down and doesn't really give you your best foot forward on the jobs that you do match to. And I know there's an opinion about resume versions. And when I bring that topic up, I get a lot of pushback. Oh, you want me to lie on my resume? I do not. What happens is, in today's world, mostly today, especially today, there's actually a whole lot of technology that goes when you submit a resume through a job posting. A lot of times, if you submit a resume and you've never changed a resume, you've never taken your resume and highlighted the relevant experience and expertise that's pertinent to a job posting, a lot of times the first pass at your application is through a robot, some kind of chat bot. And what happens is it doesn't do the keyword matching. It doesn't see the assembly of what the posting has as minimum requirements to what you bring to the table, because your resume is just one resume fits all. And you end up getting a pushback and your resume gets stopped and it doesn't go any further. So when I say resume versions, I'm saying not to fib on your resume, but to only extenuate the relevant experience and expertise, at least highlight those, that's pertinent to the job that you're applying to. Does that make, if that doesn't make any sense, list down your question. I'll be happy to address it near the end. And then the other piece is that there are some folks that are, in technology that are programmers. There are folks that do artistic, that are, they have the ability to visually or literally demonstrate their expertise. So if you have that kind of skill set, be prepared to demonstrate your expertise. If you're an artist, have a portfolio of work you've done. So let me continue. There are tools out there. I don't know if the university has ever, used them. Maybe in the Career Center, you guys may have, but I'm gonna, next slide talks a little bit about DISC, but there are some assessments that allow you to answer some questions based on certain scenarios. And it highlights some of your personal traits and some of your professional traits, skills, and aptitudes. But those are important to know what those are, some way, shape, or form, because sometimes the cultural fit may be great or may not be great based on some of your personal and professional traits. And things that are usually overlooked in terms of when you're looking for jobs is you overlook your family and your friends. There's a term that I use loosely that Robert De Niro kind of coined called the circle of trust. And that circle of trust are family and friends that know you well. They know what you're about. They know what your DNA is comprised of. So if you happen to have a personality that's a little bit of an introvert, and maybe you're not very bubbly or very outgoing, sometimes that's a showstopper in many cases with potentially an HR person who is expecting a little bit of engagement, but you may be very qualified. So when you go through family and friends, sometimes you end up getting introduced to the hiring manager, who gives you a little bit of more time and the opportunity to demonstrate your skills and experience because it was kind of sort of endorsed by someone in their circle. So keep that in mind, because in today's world, it's about who you know and how you know them. In fact, how I'm here and associated with your great university was through an introduction that was made between common trusted alliances between your career center and myself. So that's huge. In terms of tools that are available, job search engines are important. LinkedIn, I'm going to cover that at the very end. Some government-funded programs that allow you to kind of sort of step into a role that could potentially lead into an incredible job. The career placement services that your university offers. Sometimes, especially in this atmosphere, the way things are going today, even temping, having the opportunity to do a little bit of a trial run, working at a company to see if it's really what it's all about. See if you can try a job function that maybe you didn't know you were really forecasted for through some type of staffing or temp agency. And then, one of the things that completely overlooked, if you're in a situation where you're financially okay, maybe you live with your parents or a loved one, and you really absolutely are set on working for one particular or two particular companies, and you're just, every door has been shut, every path has been completely blocked. You know what? Volunteering at no cost is a really good point of entry. I recommend that highly because in most cases, volunteers are well received. So just keep that in mind, and if there are any questions on that, I can address those separately. So I'm going to continue. So in terms of DISC, I'm not going to go too deep into this, but it's essentially a test. I recommend that you pay for it as opposed to take the ones that are free. That it puts a number of scenarios for you, and the way you answer them, and they may ask the same question in different forms because some folks try to trick through their responses. There's really not a right or wrong answer, but at the end, it's going to tell you pretty much what quadrant you fit into, whether you're a dominant personality, whether you're a personality that provides a lot of influence. Typically, people that are in sales fall there. But these are really important, and the report that comes from such an assessment also tells you how to work with people based on their dominant strengths. So you may want to look into that, and I don't know if at the university it's something that they foster, but I've taken many of these, and usually the report back is pretty much on the money. So let me continue. So now let's get into the meat of the workshop. So preparing for an interview. So I know that researching the employer is pretty much like, I don't need a workshop to know that, but let me be a little bit deeper on this. It's important that you understand your prospective employer's industry. See what you can find out about their culture. Any news of where they're expanding, news of where they're shutting down, news of with maybe they got, some kind of penalty for doing something inappropriate. Not all financials are available. Usually they're available if they're a public company, but usually their website, you can see who their executive leaderships are. There's a website called Glassdoor that I have a little bit of a biased opinion. I don't like it because Glassdoor is supposed to be where current and former employees talk about their employer. What I don't like about Glassdoor, that it's kind of become a little bit of a, let me trash my past employer. So there are more people putting negative stuff on Glassdoor about their employers than positive. But it is out there if you wanted to get some insights on prospective employers. And then look, from a research perspective, maybe you're big into green, maybe you're big into, a certain charity, or maybe just anything at all that subjects that matter to you. You can usually find that on I would say on the internet. Not everything on the internet is true, but there are ways of researching that to really, at the end of the day, figure out who you want to work for. In terms of getting intel on your interviewers and maybe interviewing practices, I know that's tough, but everybody typically is on LinkedIn, so you can at least get a little bit of intel on the interviewer. Getting interviewing practices only if you knew someone that went through the interview with that particular interviewer, but LinkedIn, Facebook, there's a whole lot out there. At least gives you some talking points when you're building a rapport. Maybe you realize that the person interviewing you is an alumni of NSU. But it's important that if you have the names of the person who's going to interview you, for you to go a little deep on that person. Talk to current and former employees and customers. I mean, if you're going to go interview at Publix, as an example, for a particular job, most people at Publix are very talkative. Just talk to them. Hey, how long have you been here? How did it go with the interview? Did you have to take a test? Did you have to take a lie detector test? I mean, just get comfortable. This is a real mission here. Most people that don't have a job are people that don't take job interviewing or research seriously. You get what you put into it. So there's just so many things. You've been a customer of Publix, so you have a good, using Publix as an example, you have a feel for how they treat their customers, but that's an important step that most folks don't take. The other is when you look at the job description, kind of what I was talking about realistic job postings, look at the must-have job requirements as opposed to the nice-to-have job requirements. And that's a really good question to ask an interviewer. When the interviewer sits across from you and it feels like they're interrogating you, turn that around, interrogate them. And example, oh, your job posting says that you have to speak 6 languages. Is that a must-have or is that a nice-to-have? And usually what you get back, no, I don't even know why that's on there. The reality is it's only really one language, English. And if you speak one other language like Spanish, Portuguese, French, that's a huge feather in your cap. So sometimes postings will say something and they look and appear as if that's a must-have skill, when in reality it isn't. So ask the question, if is it a must-have or is it a nice-to-have? In terms of what are they going to ask you? I mean, you can literally put together a list of 100 questions that you can research in advance before you hit your first interview. So those are out there. You know, questions like, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What do you see yourself in 5 years? Why are we here? Why did you pick my company? Why should I interview you? Those are all the things that are typically out there, but you should be well aware of those questions. Building rapport. Chemistry matters. Chemistry matters whether it's an in-person, well, it matters incredibly in person. It also matters virtual because, you know, I'm here, I introduced myself, I told you a little bit about myself, I'm in my home. If I have, you know, a bunch of birds flying behind me or, you know, monkeys jumping on my shoulder, that disrupts my ability to build rapport. You don't take me seriously. So it's important that you understand that chemistry matters. Now, again, if you have a personality that's more introverted, that's okay. Just acknowledge that you have that. And in your case, you'll have to practice a little bit more than maybe someone who's got a marketing degree, maybe someone who was just born with a bubbly personality. And there is a misnomer. People think that people that have extroverted personalities end up getting more jobs than others that don't. I don't have the stats to prove that, but the reality is that knowledge and expertise is probably more important than the ability to just talk yourself through an interview. Because at the end of the day, someone's going to plug you in, and if you don't work, you know, you just talk yourself a lot into not having a job for a long time. So don't get caught up if you don't have a bubbly personality. In terms of practice, I got to be honest with you. I know that sounds like a parental advice here, but you should practice. In fact, I'll share my personal story. When I was coming out of college, I had a son. My wife and I have been married almost since high school. We had our first child in college. I don't recommend that, but we did. He's the one that graduated from NSU. He's a doctor, so we did something right somewhere. But my first job out of college had a very specific requirement. It had to pay well, had to have great benefits because I had a family already. And I interviewed 21 companies before I made my first interview with IBM, which is ultimately where I ended up getting my first job. So yeah, so I practiced a hell of a whole lot with companies that maybe found me very interesting and I had no interest in them. So I had the upper hand. And let me tell you, by the time I had my first interview with IBM, I was a pro. There wasn't a single question that they can throw at me that I hadn't seen some way, shape, or form. So this is no different than any sports. This is no different than gaming. The more you practice, the better you are. And if you have the practice of assessing yourself, maybe videotaping yourself, you're going to be more prepared than 90% of the people that just kind of just throw stuff up at the wall, see what sticks. And I will tell you this, and I believe this, hard work beats talent every day. If you happen to be talented and you work hard, you're in a class by yourself. So what do I bring to an interview? So let's start with your image, right? So initial eye contact, right? That's not easy for everyone. Some people get embarrassed when they're making eye contact with someone, but I'm giving you the basic framework. Initial eye contact, a firm handshake, you know, your facial and body gestures matter. Your attitude, you know, if you come into an interview thinking that, hey, I got this in the bag because my dad knows your dad, or because, I don't know, maybe you're the valedictorian of your class and you've gotten 99 offers. Okay, maybe you've got a little bit of confidence there to build on, but your attitude still matters. And in fact, there's a cliche that's used in the workforce called hire for attitude, train for skills. So If you don't have the skills, but you have a great attitude, you have a better chance of getting a job for someone who has the skills and has a horrible attitude. Dress attire doesn't mean suit and tie. It means appropriate for who you're working for. That's why research is important and asking the questions. Having the ability to listen and listen well, and speak when you're supposed to speak. Ability to be clear and articulate in verbal and written communications. If you're from another country and English is not your first language, um, you know, you may want to just mention that, hey, by the way, through the interview, I just want to say that English is not my first language, or maybe it's an interview in Spanish, and Spanish is not your first language. Just kind of set the foundation, and what happens that makes the interviewer kind of sort of at ease, as opposed to you trying to pull it off that, where are you from? What's your first language? English, and you don't speak English well, right? So again, it's just a matter of building rapport, letting the interviewer that you're just as much in control as the outcome as they are. An expressive level of confidence. I mean, I know confidence is not easy, but it's something that you can practice and at least get by. In terms of bring some open-ended questions, right? As opposed to just and no questions, right? Because just and no is kind of a dead end, and it's kind of, you hear crickets after the just and no. So an open-ended question could be, could you tell me more about the job? Can you tell me how many new hires you bring in a year? How many people do you interview for this particular job? Why did the person leave the job? Is this a brand new posting, a new role? Or was there someone in that role before? Did the person get promoted? You don't want a yes or no, because yes or no is kind of sort of, quickly moving through, and you really don't go deep and dive. You want to get a deep dive. Knowledge or aptitude, speak to or demonstrate your experience, especially if it brings value to the role, okay? If you look at your resume says that you've worked at Pizza Hut for the last, 3 jobs and you've been promoted, and maybe it's not relevant to the job that you're presenting yourself to, but you have the ability to speak to some of the things you do outside of the resume, maybe as a volunteer, maybe you work with on the weekends, building something that's relevant to the job. Speak up, because the aptitude, the sponge to be able to learn is something that employers look for. Leadership principles. That's a big word, okay? So I'm not going to go into this because it's public knowledge. When you get an opportunity, look up the Amazon leadership principles. There's 14 principles that guide 100% of the culture, guides 100% of the hiring practices. A leadership principle is customer obsession, earning trust, going deep, hiring the best, so on and so forth. Look that up as a small exercise. But what are your leadership principles? What is the foundation of your net worth? Are you disciplined? Do you love, obsessing over customers? Do you love, waking up at 5 in the morning so that, you can get things done? What is the fabric of your leadership? And if you don't have one, that's okay. Just go research some ones that exist, and you'll begin to realize that you do have a mapping to some leadership principles. You just haven't thought about it in that capacity. Confidence, as I mentioned, it's not easily achievable, but if you practice, you assess it, you improve, and you repeat, you'd be surprised how you can pull it off. Because at the end of the day, if someone were to ask you something about your family, or maybe about a game that you play, or maybe a sports team that you follow, and they ask you something, information, you spit it out with confidence, it's because knowledge gives you confidence. Here's another piece, right? If you want to be remembered, don't necessarily, step over the interviewer or spill coffee on their shirt or her shirt. The reality is maybe a remarkable story. Maybe you've got a story that is relevant, of course, about maybe why your grades took a dip. You're not looking for compassion. You're not looking for someone to cry over you and give you a job based on, pity. But if there's something memorable you can leave behind, that sits well with interviewers. And then, well, I missed one here. Let me go back. And then finally, have an ask of the interviewer before they go their way and you go your way. Find out if you sense the interview is not going the way you want it, say, hey, would you give me an opportunity to volunteer for a day so I can demonstrate that I'm the person for this job? I mean, you're going to baffle them because they never hear that. What do you mean volunteer for the day? Yeah, I'd like to be able to get past the interview and show you through behavior that I'm the person for this job and I want to volunteer. And you'd be surprised how, hey, no one's ever asked that. Maybe that's the story or the ask or the uniqueness that you leave behind, even if they say no, but they write it down. This person volunteered at no pay to come in and work this job. You know what? You're standing out. Those things you can bring to the interview. So I'm hoping you guys are jotting down your questions. I'm trying to, I don't want it to be workshop by PowerPoint, but at this stage, we have no choice. So here are the secrets, all right? Attitude, right? Come across as you're positive and you're low maintenance. And everybody should know what low maintenance is, okay? If you come in with a lot of baggage, oh, I'm sorry why I'm late because my car, my train, the automobile, the plane, and the neighbor and the barking dog, okay, that's high maintenance. They're gonna basically be thinking next, okay? So even if you're exploding with stress or fear, keep a cool calm, right? Practice makes that perfect. People want passion, integrity, a level of engagement, confidence. And when I say energy, I'm not talking about high bubbly and bouncing off the walls. I'm saying just, you know, when you answer a question, they hear you. When they ask a question and you don't hear them, oh, excuse me, can you repeat that? I actually didn't catch that. They want a level of engagement. It sells. Look, I had a customer early in my life that gave me a positive criticism, okay? He said, Mr. Perez, you talk fast. I can barely sometimes make out what you're saying, but whatever you're selling, I'm buying it because your passion speaks for itself. And so, I mean, that sat with me for years thinking, okay, that was a knock. He knocked me down, but it was more of a positive feedback. And it took me years to get over it. And now I get it because passion does sell. Relationships. I kind of attribute it to your whole circle of trust. It really is who you know and how you know them, right? So if anybody ever wanted to go to a concert or some big sports event, if anybody on the call wanted to go to the Super Bowl, not sure if they went, there's one easy way to go. Know somebody who plays for one of the teams, and I guarantee you'd be there. So my point is relationships matter, right? Because regrettably, we do live in an era where it matters who you know and how you know them. Discipline. I once was asked when I owned my business why I wake up at 5:30. And I said very simple, because my competition wakes up at 8. I mean, if you're able to maintain that level of discipline, that sells, okay? That sells to an employer. Plan. That's ultimately what we're talking about here, because no one ever plans to fail, but most plan to, no one ever plans to fail, right? But most fail to plan is the reality. So if this getting a job is incredibly important, because at the end of the day, you know, it's the top of the food chain. Without a dollar, it's very difficult to make it to live these days. You've got to plan for it. We talked about the research, right? We talked about, you know, not rambling on. I am rambling on, but I'm also being guided by my slides. But when someone asks you a question and you feel confident that you've answered it, stop, right? No signs of desperation. Oh, Mr. Perez, I've got to be honest with you. I've had 36,000 interviews, and if I don't get this job today, I'm going to jump off a bridge. And, you know, and that's a sad statement from someone to make. But if emotion aside, you know what the person on the other side is thinking? I hope you can swim, and I hope you have swimming trunks, because you're not going to get this job, you know? So you don't want a sign of desperation. The old saying, don't let them see you sweat, is real, right? Because folks are trying to make decisions based on business as opposed to emotion. Network. LinkedIn, for those that don't know, alumni. I got to tell you, and this is not a spotlight on the University of Florida, but I can tell you, because I went to UF, the Gator Nation has a pretty big alumni in Florida. I have yet to ever find a situation where I'm meeting a new person and I just say, go Gators, okay? That I don't get back, go Gators, and then rapport is built in an instance. So if you're proud of, being a shark, and I encourage you to be proud, okay? And you know through your research that your employer is a shark alumni, say go Sharks, and you would probably already hit a triple and you're on third base as opposed to first base. Trust me on that, it works. And of course, we talked about your circle of trust. Always connecting, touch points. A touch point is knowing that it's someone's birthday and wishing them happy birthday, but not saying happy birthday. And by the way, can you hire me? No, it's just a one-way communication where you just acknowledge people in your network. Typically, I do it through LinkedIn. It's a one-way communication. I'm not expecting anything in return, and I'm not trying to ask for anything. I do about 150 of those a day. Community. People talk about, well, I can't give my time. I need to get a job. Okay, well, if you're home, and we all have to be home now, but if you're home and you don't have a job and everything you've tried has been zero, then why don't you volunteer somewhere? And I guarantee you that there could be a chance that you're going to rub elbows with your future employer. Because I had a story where I was trying to get to the CEO of a company, failed miserably at it, and I was working at a non-charitable organization, a nonprofit organization, better said, and I was digging, for planting trees, and I rubbed elbows with the wife of the CEO I was trying to get to. And guess what happened a week later? I got to be in front of his presence. Did I plan for that? No, I was doing good. So I think, and this is more philosophical than anything else, so I won't go any further, but if you want to get, you should figure out how to give. Even if you think you're down and out, there's always someone else who has it worse than you do. And then finally, practice, assess, improve, and practice. I can't begin to tell you how important it is. If you have a real interest in working somewhere, don't make that your first job interview. Practice with some other companies that you don't want to work for. And then the thing I'll leave you with are some things regarding LinkedIn. For those that are not very active on LinkedIn, it's just not good enough to have a good resume anymore. You've got to have a strong professional online presence. LinkedIn gives you the opportunity to really have folks assess your skills so that when someone says that you are an expert in something, you can have people validate those skills. You can join relevant groups. So if you think you have the ability to speak about disaster recovery, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the financial services industry, there are groups on LinkedIn that you can join and you can answer questions. And I got to tell you, employers all the time are looking for those that are answering questions on these LinkedIn groups, because you're coming across as an expert on a subject, and that's what employers are looking for. And then finally, look, I mean, I'm not going to ask the question because I don't think I'm going to get if I was sitting in front of an in-person classroom, I would ask this question. But the difference between marketing and branding, most people don't know. Marketing is when you tell people what you're about. Like, I'm going to market to you what I'm all about. Branding is what people think of you already based on what's out there. So if you think that having a Facebook picture or Facebook profile shouldn't be as professional as the one that you have in LinkedIn, you're wrong. Because if you have 3 beer cans on top of your head in Facebook and you look like you just took a glamour shot on Facebook, employers are going to settle that the person you are is the one with the beer cans in your head. So branding is not something you're in control of directly. It's about the examples that you set. Do you walk with integrity? Are you on time? Are you disciplined? Do you deliver on your commitments? Do you help others? Are you a team player? Are you mindful of the way you behave, the way others behave? At the end of the day, your branding will make or break you. And that's, I think, all I got for you.
Thank you, Hugo. We have several questions.
All
And
right.
by the way, everyone, we do have a workshop next week that I'm conducting on building your online presence. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and look on Handshake. You can sign up there. So here are the questions for you.
Woohoo.
The
Okay,
first one is
let's start.
Christy. Oh, go ahead. You're
No,
good?
go ahead. Why don't you ask me the questions? Because it's easier than me try to sort through them.
Yes. So the first one is from Christy. Is she made, I think, a comment that this is a common employer question is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I'm not sure if she wanted maybe some clarification or she's just making a comment that that's a common question that employers ask. Where do you
They
see
do.
5 years?
They do. The most employers ask that question because they want to see if you can even. It's not about what your answer is. It's about if you're able to answer it. If you stumble, well, wait a minute. Let me think about that. Can I get back to you on that? Then that's not what they want to hear. They want to hear that without hesitation, you have the ability to answer that question. Oh, I'm going to get my master's in 3 years. I'm going to start in this role, and then ultimately I want to leverage my master's and in place experience to ultimately get into management if the opportunity serves itself. They just want to know if you can answer that question without a blink of an eye. Because if you can't answer it without a blink of an eye, one, they assume you're an amateur at interviewing, or two, you really don't know what you want and why do they want you on their team.
Okay. The next question is from Farrell. Should we bold keywords or not?
Wait. So ask the question again. So you what?
This question is from Farrell. Should we bold keywords on the resume or not?
No, I would not. I would not. I just wouldn't have that many keywords. Again, back to my point, have different versions of your resumes, highlighting. And when I say highlighting, and I'm glad that question was asked, I literally don't mean bolding. Just highlighting the skill sets that are relevant to the job that you're interviewing for, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what is going to be looked at to make sure there's a match. But bolding them doesn't necessarily give you an advantage, right? You're almost telling the person reading your resume, hey, I know you're an idiot. You're not going to read my resume. So if you end up getting one word out of my resume, it's going to be the ones I bold. So that's just my opinion. Obviously, I respect anybody else's opinion on that, but I've never been kind of sort of moved by bold letters because I take resumes and I literally tear them apart to see what's really there.
Thank you. The next one is a comment from us. So in the comment section, we wrote in, if you ask your career advisor about focus to career, that is similar to the DISC test that Hugo referred to. And the code for that is SHARKS.
Okay.
Next one.
Nice.
A reminder from Hugo yourself to look up Amazon leadership principles. The next one is from Nick. Oh, Nick just made a comment. Should I say fins up at the interview? But I responded to him on there. I don't know if you wanted to add something. I don't think that's what you were referring to. I think it was just being funny. Not necessarily at the interview. It was when you were referring to the networking portion and how, to make that connection with someone that's an alumni.
100%. If that person is not an alumni, and by the way, an alumni is defined by graduation, right? So sometimes LinkedIn will say attended NSU, but they didn't get their degree. So sometimes it could backfire if you're not 100% sure that they actually graduated from the school. Because I've had a couple of those. Oh, go Gators. Yeah, that's not cool. I hate the Gators because they threw me out because I failed. So you really want to confirm that they actually got their degree from the university.
And I just want to mention one thing. So probably back in 2007, I believe, is when we went from the Knights to the Sharks. So depending on who you're talking to,
oh, that's right,
NSU, because some of my previous alum who were Knights with myself are not so keen on the fact that we're not the Knights anymore. So it's maybe just be careful and say like go NSU or something like that. Just
got it.
Adverb.
That's great. That's great.
Okay, we have a few more. Christy wanted to know, is it still common? Do you still receive thank you cards, or should I still send thank you cards the day after the interview?
Oh, sure. I mean, if I was gonna, if I received a thank you card, I would expect the following: not a novel, not every single white space on the card filled out. I would just say thank you by the person's name, right? Mr. Perez, thank you for your time. It was great. And put something relevant that'll force me to remember our interview, because I'm going to interview a lot of people, right? So thank you for pointing out blah 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 blah. And I look forward to receiving your call on the next step, something to the effect. But make sure it's to the point and not a novel, because I've received thank you cards that it's a novel. I mean, literally they fill up all the white space and they write on the back. And that's not really what a thank you card is. It should be just 1 or 2 sentences that are meaningful, and you can tell that you did it by hand, not by computer.
The next question is a very common one, and that is, can you point out what we should focus on when the employer asks the question, tell me about yourself?
Sure. You want to talk a little bit about potentially kind of sort of where you grew up really quickly. If you have anybody in your family that's done anything that's important, like maybe served in the military, served our country, maybe had done anything where they invented something, or maybe they retired from the industry that you're interviewing with. Talk about you're the middle child, and talk about maybe you're the first to go to college. Just things to show that you're a human being, someone that talks a little bit about, you're from the hometown, just for them to get a real good sense of who you are and what you are. If you want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you do, what I would not get into is if you sense that the person on the other side, if you cannot tell if the person on the other side loves animals, I wouldn't get into, I have 16 cats and I raise, chickens, right? Because that's potentially finding yourself down a path that isn't going to draw any applause from the potential employer. But just when they're asking, tell me about yourself, they want to know what are you about? What are you ambitious about? Why are you here? Why did you go to this school? Why did you major this? And is there anybody around you that can kind of sort of extenuate what you bring to the table in this interview? But they really want to get to know who you are. They want to get down to as much of that DNA as possible, and they're asking to see how much in common they have with you. So that's why it's important to research the interviewer if you can. So when they ask you that question, you only spit out the things that is relevant to them.
Okay, we have Ashida. Her comment is that she's been applying to several jobs and she hasn't been receiving any callbacks. Should she change her resume for the different jobs?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, if you're just blindly applying and there's no one referring you, there's no one inside that could potentially, point your application out to someone. I mean, that's tough in during these times. I mean, it's tough. I mean, people want to hire from a pool of people that are known or endorsed. So I'm not saying that, that it's impossible to get a job if you don't know someone, but it's getting there. It's getting near impossible. So it's important for you to plan that. And you may think that if you're from another country and you're a foreign student and you don't have any connections, I don't know. I mean, just a mere fact from the alumni, I can't imagine that you'd be the only student from your country, from your hometown, regardless of what country you're from, that you're the one and only person that's ever gone to NSU. So you may want to start with the alumni, but it's so important today. I can't press that upon you enough that you should absolutely have some dot that you're connecting before you hit that send button. Ideally, to get referred in. And yes, you should modify your resume and only present a resume that highlights your true experience, not made up stuff, right? No one's asking you to make stuff up to get the interview. I'm talking about, spell out, highlight the best you can, even if you have to bold a few things of how you match up with that job. Okay. I would rather hear you say, I've only applied to 10 jobs, right? But I've done all the research, then I've applied to 100, because the numbers game does not work in your favor if you're just applying blindly. It just doesn't, not in today's times.
Okay.
And by the way, I got to Amazon through a referral. So it wasn't, I had applied a couple times before, and it, like, I didn't even exist.
Okay, the next question. If you are changing fields, say from industrial engineering to IT, by pursuing your master's in IT, and though your past experience is related to IE, not IT, how do you incorporate that into your resume?
Well,
Also,
first and foremost, the first question is, why are you changing careers, right? So you have to be prepared to answer that. So if the answer is, because I couldn't find a job as an IE, graduate, that's not a good answer, right? You want to make sure that you provide a response that shows that what you learned through your undergraduate degree, right, and experience, you're leveraging as essentially a boomerang to get you and be a little bit more focused in IT. No one's going to fault you if you wanted to, to do something in IT, right? Because everything is technology related, right? But at the end of the day, you want to have a really legitimate, decent answer of why you're switching careers, right? And again, if you're actually, if the question was based on someone changing career path upon getting a master's, yeah, that's an easy one to answer, because you're getting your master's. You're investing in yourself, right? And you're bringing up more tools and increasing yourself as an asset to a potential employer. I don't think you're going to get a lot of pushback, but just make sure you have a legitimate answer of why you're making that move. You have the right to change your careers. I mean, there's no right or wrong to that. Just make sure it's not an emotional reason of why you're changing.
sorry, Hugo, I interrupted you. I thought you were done. This was the first question that was asked. Should students hope to secure a summer internship during this COVID-19 crisis?
You know what? I don't have a substantiated answer to that yet. But I was just having a conversation with a young man yesterday, a friend of a friend, the son of a friend. And I told him that there's a potential chance that internships will increase during this summer because of the circumstances. A lot of folks have lost their full-time jobs, but in many cases, the jobs are still there. The work still has to get done, but companies just don't have the means to pay for those employees. So guess who's going to pick up the slack? Interns. I think that internships are going to be the a way. I can't back that up yet, because one, it isn't summer yet, but maybe as a university, you guys can figure out and maybe look at some of the big employers down here that you guys are associated with, the Citrixes of the world, American Express, and see and say, hey, now that we're going through this hardship, would you consider hiring a greater number of interns to kind of, pick up the slack of some of the positions that are no longer employed because of, lack of funding. But I think internships are going to grow in the summer because the jobs still have to get done. Royal Caribbean, NCL, Carnival, who've laid off hundreds of people, still have a job to do. They're not going out of business. So I would suspect that interns and temps, temporary employees, are going to fill those gaps.
Thank you. The next question is related to the thank you note. How long after the interview should I wait to send the thank you note? Or
okay, sure. It all depends how you're going to get that thank you note over. I would potentially, if you can, get that note hand delivered 2 days, within 2 days of that interview, right? It doesn't mean you track them down at their house and you wait by the mailbox, because that's stalking. But if you have the ability to, if they're going to be on campus for a couple days, and you have the ability to drop it off personally, do so. So that way they make that eye contact again and they can remember who you were. If you're going to mail it, I would mail it within 5 days of the interview and make sure you have the correct mailing address and the correct spelling of their name.
The next question from Farrell is, in the initial application phase, how do we separate ourselves from students in target schools? If a company has a list of target schools and your school isn't part of that list, how do we get the interview?
You got to find somebody who's going to put you ahead of the stack. Absolutely. Someone's got to refer you from within, or someone's got to literally, speak on your behalf. Or if there's a way for you to find yourself elbow to elbow through, maybe volunteering at a charitable organization that the hiring manager happens to be there. I know that sounds a little corny, that sounds a little cheesy, but I mean, that works, for someone to be able to present themselves is as good as nothing. But in that case, you really need to be referred in. Someone's got to put their endorsement on you so that they go outside the norm and give you an opportunity. Because all you want is an interview opportunity, right? It's almost like being on American Idol. You want an opportunity to be on stage. Because once you get the microphone, you got to be able to kind of deliver.
FYI, Katie posted a comment regarding NSU Connect. I am also going to take a lot of this information that has been shared and send it to you via email. That way you have it all in one place. The next question is, sorry, my screen is moving. Okay, the next question is, if we are sending out cover letters during this time, should we reference or acknowledge this pandemic, or should we approach it like everything is normal?
I mean, you could reference the pandemic, just don't call it CV-19 or COVID-19, right? You can paraphrase that by saying during these global health challenges, right? Or maybe a global health storm or something that kind of sends the note that you're acknowledging that things are not normal, that we're all affected by it. But if you start throwing COVID-19, I mean, that's like the kiss of death. No pun intended, because the reality is no one wants to hear that anymore. In fact, I have my own instructions at my own company to refrain from using COVID-19 or even every reference to the coronavirus. I think, because you don't know at the end of the day if you're going to hit a sour point. You may actually send a cover letter in with Corona, 19 or CV-19, and maybe someone knows someone who passed away, and you just put yourself in the gutter, But acknowledging it as, in these challenging times, in these new times, and this, temporary global health storm, I think people will understand that you're providing some form of empathy without getting too deep into a controversy.